Daniel here, welcome to the channel. Trad anchors are a hyper-important part of trad climbing. They're the most technical, most nuanced, most complex, and most argued about component of the subdiscipline. How do I place mine, and what are the most important things to remember when making one? So trad anchors are what you create on the top of every pitch on a trad route if there aren't any bolts, made as safe places you clip onto and belay off in order not to die. They take the place of chains in sport leading. People throw around a lot of acronyms like serene or earnest. I go with the acronym SHIT. If your anchor isn't the SHIT, you should probably redo it. This is better than the acronyms mentioned because those acronyms don't take a lot into account, because if you just list them off in your head without thinking about anything else, it's a path toward natural selection. There are almost as many specific codes for placing anchor pieces as there are climbers. Some are happy with 2 pieces while many aren't. Some say you should conserve gear while others will anchor with 4 cams and not see a problem. And they all have different opinions on trees. It all depends on priorities and many viewpoints are valid. That said, here are my opinions. Let's dive into them. First of all, the place where you build the trad anchor is very important. You want a place that has several protectable features, not just one crack. You want to avoid weird topography, sticking to a place where you can see or almost see the route in both directions. You want to find a place that is in line with the route and most crucially has placements that you can use to build a good directional trad anchor. If you have a good guidebook, it'll describe where to place the anchor and even what gear to spare to make it. Reach your spots, place one bomber piece and either clip the rope into it or do what I like to do and safety into it. Once you have all that, start building. I use the 6-point system, where all of your pieces are rated and have to add up to at least 6 points. 2 points are given to good, solid, normal pieces. Well-placed cams, large nuts, hexes, large tri-cams, and slings placed on normal jugs or thread-throughs. 3 or 4 are given to slings around huge trees or boulders, and 6 points are given if you sling a large boulder or a huge tree, if and only if you sling it with the best sling you have, the rope itself. Normal rules apply to all this gear. You want the cams to not be over or under cammed, you want everything to be in solid rock on placements that don't wiggle too much, etc. Overall, every piece you place should be able to catch a fall on its own. Well-placed micro cams, that's pretty much everything below 0.5, and micro nuts get 1 point each. Bolts and decent looking fixed gear get 3 points each. You can guess how many points a badly placed piece of any kind gets. 0. There are a few ways to add gear to 6 points. You could place 3 microcams and 2 big nuts, you could place a huge secure sling and a cam, etc. If you get to 6 points and you still don't like it, just add more gear. It's really that simple. I have made 13.7 piece anchors before. Especially if you're a beginner and you're not under time pressure, just go for it. The pieces are best placed less than a couple meters away from each other. You also want them placed in more than one feature. If you place them all in one crack and the rock on one side of that crack shifts a tiny bit, that's your whole anchor gone. One caveat is that any gear you place is gear you probably won't use for the next pitch. This is why I only place 1 cam on my anchor if I possibly can. I try to make every piece in my anchor look different. It can be a tri-cam, a sling, and a hex, for instance. During and after placing pieces, you also want to think about where the rope is going once you start belaying, and maybe also where it will be going on the next pitch. Place stuff that can handle forces in both those directions. Now you've placed at least 6 points of good directional pieces you're happy with. The next thing you'll do is equalize them. Equalizing trad anchors can be done in a few ways, including with the rope itself, but you'll typically be equalizing them with a hyper long sling or loop of cordlette. I have a 3.6 meter long sling for this, but I often wish it was longer. Simply follow these steps. 1. Add carabiners or draws to all the gear you want to be part of the anchor. You want to extend pieces which are further back. 2. Clip the sling to every beaner in the system. 3. Take the parts of the sling between every piece of gear and draw them together. To make this easier, I use the small beaner I store the anchor sling on. Pull the whole thing tight in the direction you think the tensioned rope will be going. Now you've distributed the load between all the gear in the system and made a nice equalized anchor you can clip to and belay off. But there are still some pretty huge issues you haven't sorted out. If a falling rock cuts any part of your anchor sling, you die. Not to mention that if a piece of gear pops out, the whole anchor will extend immediately, shock loading the other gear and maybe pulling that out too. We want our pieces to be independent, and the easiest way to do that is by tying a big overhand knot in the anchor sling. You can clip safety, belay device, everything to the resulting loop. You still have to bear some things in mind here. You want the knot not to include the sling stitching, since that'll make the knot weaker. A simple hack for avoiding this is girth hitching the sling to the top piece of gear near the stitching. You also don't want the final result to have huge angles between gear, since this multiplies force on the gear. If you try to grab two bars that are very far apart and take your feet off the ground, you'll understand why you don't want to do the same thing to your gear. It's best practice to always keep the angle at under 90 degrees. That was a lot of important info, and maybe you do need an acronym. Just remember what I said at the beginning, you need your anchors to be SHIT. S for secure with unbreakable pieces. H for having enough pieces for your anchor to be well backed up and redundant. I for isolated, so that if any piece or sling is removed or cut, the system doesn't fall apart. And T for tensioned appropriately. The different strands should be as close to equally tensioned as is practical, and the final setup shouldn't involve high angles which put undue tension on the pieces. As always, look past that acronym. Checklists and acronyms don't save you from having to use your own brain. If the anchor isn't at the cliff edge itself, you can extend it to see the climber. My favorite way of doing this is pulling in however much rope I need, clove hitching the rope to the anchor using a locking biner, and tying an alpine butterfly to the strand of rope running down to the climber to attach the belay device to. As always, make sure the belay device is between you and the anchor to make belaying less awkward. Of course, we're kind of assuming this spherical gear in a vacuum state of play that climbers would dream of in the real world. You don't usually have all the gear or time or placements in the world to yourself, and good anchors can be very hard to make efficiently. When you're climbing more dangerous routes under more realistic conditions, you'll have to make compromises and use your brain and personal judgment. I've placed gear at an angle over 90 degrees, but only when the gear itself was directional and in an inward direction. You may have to make a two-piece 4-point anchor, in which case you might have to belay from your harness instead of from the anchor itself, using your feet to anchor yourself, and this can be a pretty good tactic if you know how to escape a belay. A good climber knows all the rules, but they also know where and how to break them. I'd say that if you're a beginner, learn as much as you can in a controlled environment as possible. Of course, an anchor is only as good as its pieces, and you'll have to learn how to place those first. See you next time.